channel where every week I whisper about a different horror movie that I love, or in this case, a horror movie that you love, because it is week 2 of viewer request month. Luckily in this case, the request was also a movie I love. I think you all have very good taste. I would have still done it if it was a movie I hated, because those are the rules of your request month. I will talk about any movie that you request. I mean, it has to be a horror movie. If you say, oh, I want you to talk about Space Cowboys or Secondhand Lions, I don't know why I just chose those two films. I guess I'm thinking of late 90s, early aughts films with older actors in it. But I digress. If you asked me to talk about a movie that wasn't a horror movie, I might not honor it. But that wasn't the case this week. As I'm sure you already know from the title or the thumbnail on the video, tonight's film will be 1981's The Evil Dead, written and directed by Sam Raimi. It's funny because this first one is called The Evil Dead, and Evil Dead 2 is just Evil Dead, and then the television show is Ash vs. Evil Dead, but that's all pretty inconsequential. So I thought what we'd do first is read the request, maybe so we can get some context as to who the viewer is and what they wanted to hear about. So here we go. So this came from I Kill Your Vibe, username I Kill Your Vibe. If you have a non-username on there, your real name, and I'm missing it, apologies, but I Kill Your Vibe said, I would like to hear your thoughts on any of the 3 Evil Dead films. All 3 have a different blend of horror and comedy, so I think you would do a good review. Thank you, I appreciate that. So, the mixture of horror and comedy, I completely agree in that the sense of humor is actually different, or maybe not the sense of humor, the blend of horror and comedy is different across the 3 films, which I'm excited to talk about today. We'll make sure we hit on that. And when you made this request, I actually debated which one to cover. My favorite of the series, like most people I think, would have to be Evil Dead 2, sometimes called Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn. I love the special effects in that film. In a way, it's almost like a do-over of the first film, even though it is a direct sequel with a bigger budget. It reminds me a little bit of Desperado compared to its predecessor El Mariachi in that sense. So I really wanted to do Evil Dead 2. The problem is it's not really streaming on many different sites. I guess I could have rented it, but I have so many different streaming services. Anytime I pay additional money to rent a film, I feel like I'm throwing it away. Sorry, I'm being kind of a cheapskate, but Army of Darkness and Evil Dead were both streaming. I like Army of Darkness a lot, but I like the first one a little bit better, so I figured we would start with that. And I should preface this by saying I love all 3 of these films, so much like Halloween, I can see a world where I cover all of the films in the Evil Dead series, so I figured I would get to Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness eventually. So here we are today, talking about Evil Dead 1, or The Evil Dead. So the premise for this film is very simple. We'll go over it really quick, just in case you don't know about it, but it's the feature-length debut from Sam Raimi, who back in the 70s and 80s was a student at, I believe, Michigan State University, along with Bruce Campbell, the star of this movie. And he wrote this screenplay with a very simple premise of 5 college students go from Michigan, go to a cabin in rural Tennessee. They uncover the Necronomicon, the Book of the Dead, and also a recording from an archaeologist who was studying it. And inadvertently, the recording releases the evil forces, the demonic forces from this book shook and they overtake the cabin. Spoiler alert, Ash ends up the last man standing and has to fight back against the Deadites, or the Evil Dead. All of his friends get possessed, the trees get possessed, everything in the cabin and the surrounding land gets possessed. And so it's definitely a cabin in the woods type situation. Very simple premise. And it of course launched Sam Raimi, I don't want to say superstar, because I think there are very few directors that would be considered superstars, but it launched his professional career, and Bruce Campbell's, and of course they've gone on to do all sorts of wonderful things, including more Evil Dead movies. So that's the background, which, like I said, I don't know if that's the most interesting thing. I'm sure all of you all know that already. But let's talk about the blend of horror and comedy in this film, because I think that's what the Evil Dead franchise gets most praise for, is this unique pastiche of, when I think of the second movie and I read about it, I feel like it has everything from Texas Chainsaw Massacre to the Night of the Living Dead to the Three Stooges to Looney Tunes. It has all these different influences cited as being connected to the movie, and I think all of that is correct in the second movie. Bruce Campbell in the second movie is almost going insane throughout, and as a result he almost starts laughing at the gruesome situation he's found himself in, which makes sense if you think about it, because it's a direct continuation of the first film. So he's already dealt with all of the horrific events in the first film to the point where this all starts seeming kind of funny, right? But in rewatching this, the original Evil Dead, I have to admit, I actually didn't find it that funny, and I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as, I'm not sure if the movie is supposed to be especially funny, but the interesting thing about that is that I remembered it as being really funny, I think because it gets overshadowed by the rest of the series, and I haven't seen the television show Ash vs. Evil Dead, but from what I hear, one of the people in the Losers Club, Mike Rothman, he reviewed it for the AV Club. From what I hear, it is funny. So in watching this one, not that it was completely unfunny, it wasn't like it was Hereditary or some completely straight-faced horror movie. You see some moments of levity between the five friends, especially before they get possessed and all the demonic forces descend upon the cabin. But I didn't exactly find the horror elements to be funny as they are in the second film. In the second film, you have the deer head on the wall who's laughing, and the scene where Ash has to cut off his own hand with is it a meat cleaver he uses? I can't remember. And then put a chainsaw on it. That's funny because of how extreme the situation is. And like I said, by that point, Ash has turned into a total Looney Tune. He's just cackling at the shittiness of this situation. Side note, I think that's the first time I've uttered a swear word on this channel. Apologies. Not that I'm not allowed to swear, but I don't know if that throws people off when they listen and are trying to relax. Confession, I swear a lot in real life, and I made a conscious effort not to do it on my ASMR channel because I don't want to jolt anyone or disrupt anyone's relaxation with a piece of sailor vocabulary. But hey, that just came out, and it might happen every now and then. Let me know in the comments if you do or don't prefer swear words in your ASMR. Yeah, so anyway, in the second movie, I feel like he's been pushed past the point of logic, and he doesn't know what else to do but laugh, even when he has to cut off his own hand, especially when he has to cut off his own hand. But this original film feels a lot more sober to me. There are points when I chuckle a little bit when, after he's had to kill all his friends, and they keep coming back, and they keep coming back, and they keep coming back, and the basement turns into a literal bloodbath, just blood spewing everywhere. It is a little funny. It's kind of like the bad joke that keeps getting told and told and told and told until it's funny, and then it goes to not being funny, and then it goes to funny again. One of the things I love about this movie is that I feel like Sam Raimi pushes it beyond the limits of acceptability. more from a sense of duration. There are gorier movies than Evil Dead, although Evil Dead's pretty gory. But I think where the movie really starts to feel shocking is how much Sam Raimi draws this out. I feel like there could be 3 climaxes of this movie because him and the effects supervisor, Tom Sullivan, they just keep upping the ante in terms of the gore and how gross the monsters look, and yeah, just how long it all lasts. I feel like it starts to get a little funny at the end, not because what's happening is actually funny, but it's just been going on and going on and going on, and you maybe start to feel the onset a little bit of that feeling that Ash experiences in Evil Dead 2, where he just is past the point of caring what happens to him. Or he is caring, but caring so much that he has to laugh at him. But outside of that, I did not find much to laugh at. I actually think this movie is very upsetting and unsettling. And I think a lot of that has to do with the chemistry between the 5 humans. And it's funny because we really don't see a lot of them before things start to go south. We see this car ride up to the mountains of Tennessee, and we understand the dynamic a little bit of there being 2 couples and a sister, Ash's sister, Cheryl. We see them just sort of having mundane commonalities and interactions the way that I'm sure my friends and I have looked when we went on road trips in college. That's not to say they don't seem close in this. They do seem close. I think the acting is actually very easy and natural. But the film doesn't spend a ton of time trying to give them really high stakes before they unearth the Necronomicon, if that makes sense. I feel like sometimes with horror movies, especially horror movies that involve people stuck inside one place for a long time, the Cabin in the Woods type movie, the film goes to great length to set up some kind of human drama between the characters. One of them that comes to mind is The Lodge, which came out earlier this year, which I really love. But The Lodge is so much about how the situation before they got into the cabin is going to influence the events of the cabin. So with The Lodge, there's a mom who killed herself, there's a new stepmother, there's all this background about a cult. Everything is loaded by the time the characters get into the cabin. And that's where the horror comes from a lot in that movie. The Evil Dead, not so much. I mean, they are just students going on a getaway to a cabin, and that's it. I would say it doesn't even have as much stakes as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre does in the beginning, because when I'm describing it in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, this idea of young adults just going to a house somewhere. But if you think about it, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is very loaded. The relationship between Sally and her brother is already very tense for various reasons. They're concerned that their grandfather's grave has been dug up and desecrated, and they're trying to recover a little bit of family history. So even though Texas Chainsaw Massacre on its surface is, a group of teenagers or college students trying to have an idyllic day, and it gets interrupted, I would argue that the stakes are already loaded before things start to go wrong in that movie. The Evil Dead, not so much. That car ride that we see, they're just kind of joking around, and when they get to the cabin, they unload, and they're sort of throwing their supplies to each other. Once they get in, they're playing cards, they're drawing. It really is just like a mundane, relaxed, easy weekend at a cabin. Then they hear these noises, they uncover this book, and everything goes to hell, literally. And when I think about Cabin in the Woods horror movies, there aren't many like that. I feel like a lot of them are trying really hard to plant all these human stakes in there, and that's not bad. I like those movies too. Like I said, I love The Lodge. But I think it just makes this movie stand out even more to me, the fact that it's interesting to watch these people because of their natural chemistry. It's interesting just to watch them hang out for a few minutes, just enough so you care a little bit about them. And then once the movie pivots, it pivots. It is just non-stop from the tree attack, when I think it's Linda, apologies if I'm getting any facts wrong, gets gets attacked by these trees in the woods, gets sexually assaulted by these trees in the woods, and from then on, it just does not let up. And I mentioned before the sense of escalation that this movie holds on to, and I don't know if there's a horror movie that, maybe The Thing, if I'm thinking about it, but what I was going to say is that I don't know if there's another horror movie that really ties the escalation to the visual effects quite like the Evil Dead films do. As I said, at first it's just tree branches, scary enough on its own, right? And you've seen this unseen force kind of wandering through the woods, which, once again, I'm sure all of you know this, because the film had no money, they didn't have a proper Steadicam, so they just had a piece of plywood, put a camera on it, had two people run through the woods. That's how they got that great effect. So you've seen this camera trick, and you've seen the trees, which are scary, but it's a pretty basic effect, right? It's just literal tree limbs coming in from off screen, nothing too fancy, right? And then when the first friend gets possessed, and she has all this crazy demon makeup on, and something I love about the movie is that, I'm sure this was a trick just to get around having to show a smooth transition, but I actually think it adds to the horror. When they show someone get possessed by a deadite or become a deadite, every shot they become a little bit more deteriorated. So when they're playing cards and the one friend suddenly looks a little bit like Linda Blair from The Exorcist, they cut away, she attacks, they cut back to her, the makeup is cakier, it's dustier, it's grosser. They show another cutaway, they go back to her and maybe she's oozing a little bit, and then by the time Ash throws her into the basement, she's bloated and doesn't look anything like the woman she was just a few seconds ago. And I feel like if they did that today, which they kind of do in the Evil Dead remake, which isn't too bad to be honest, but I feel like when they do it today, they would show some kind of overly fluid CGI transition. And with this, I just love that it's grossness cut away, even more grossness cut away, even more grossness, and it just keeps going throughout the movie, and that applies to all the Deadite characters. Tom Sullivan really outdid himself, even though this is just his first movie. And it's funny, I was looking up his credits. I had assumed that he would have handled the makeup and prosthetics for so many films after this, because when I think about movies with special effects I really like From Dusk Till Dawn, for instance, when you see some of the vampires in From Dusk Till Dawn melting and their eyeballs popping out and spewing gross liquid everywhere, it feels indebted to this movie to the point where I was convinced that, it had to have been Tom Sullivan who worked on From Dusk Till Dawn and so many other films that seem indebted to his makeup, but I looked and there's really not a lot. I think he did the other Evil Dead films, and I want to say The Fly 2, which makes sense because I think the makeup effects in The Fly 2 are even more disgusting than in the first Fly, especially that there's a dog in The Fly 2 that they show. I don't even want to get into it here. I love dogs, and it's just, I can't watch that scene. But yeah, so even though Tom Sullivan has not done a prolific amount of work, I think the work he did do it really makes its point, it makes its mark, because like I said, so many other films after this look very similar in terms of the melty zombies and the very Fulci-esque caked on makeup. I'm a big sucker for undead slash monster slash zombie makeup where it just looks like it's being slathered on in layers, like you could just knock some of it off with your hands. Not so much concerned with looking completely realistic, like I've never seen a possessed person, but it probably wouldn't look that thick and congealed, but that doesn't matter. I like that it looks a little fake and just like something you discovered in an attic. It's really gross. So big hat to Tom Sullivan for that. And yeah, once they throw her in the basement, it's just one by one Ash's friends getting killed and then becoming these deadites, succumbing to this force that's surrounding everything. One of my favorite sequences is in the basement where the light bulb is filling up with blood, and we get more of that in Evil Dead 2, and eventually the effects evolve to the point where they're using stop motion. They actually did some really impressive stop motion for this film. And I wish we had more stop motion in movies these days. I know it's really costly and time consuming. It's that thing where you have to animate for hours to get just a few seconds, maybe even days just to get a few seconds, but it's such a distinct effect, and it was used out of necessity back in the days of Ray Harryhausen and even through the 80s. I mean, it was used because they didn't have CGI, right? But there's something so otherworldly and distinct about it. They use it in some of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies too, and I really just love seeing it. I always forget how impressive the stop motion work is in this film at the end when Ash has finally managed to, well, he thinks he's managed to dispatch the Deadites with this dagger, this magical supernatural dagger that's also in the basement with his book. And we've already seen them explode in these gouts of blood, and I know if they wanted to, I'm sure Tom Sullivan could have shown just some practical dissolving effect, but instead, as these bodies are decomposing before our very eyes, it goes into claymation mode. It almost looks like something out of the intro of Pee-wee's Playhouse. I don't know if any of y'all ever watched that, but that's what it reminded me of. And I think I'm always disturbed by what's the right word I'm looking for? Visual contrast in horror movies. I love seeing an effect that looks out of place, because then it starts to mess with my sense of reality. I don't always need things to look realistic. I like to be jarred. I like to be disrupted. I like for effects to kind of happen out of nowhere and make you tilt your head a little bit, and that's what I feel like in the end when these bodies are dissolving. It's almost hypnotic, as gross as it is. You're seeing everything just twist around into these slug-like appendages, but then they mix it in with some really gross non-clay. When Ash's friend is, it almost looks like oatmeal melting out of his cup. I'm sure it was just puree or baby food or something gross, but it's melting out of his cuff with the claymation, and just that combination is really putrid and unsettling to me. There's also a lot of, like I said before, eyeballs popping out and just emitting white, slimy, sickly fluid everywhere. That always grosses me out too. Stuff with eyes always gets to me in horror movies. Oh, and something we should say about the blood in the film. So traditionally, the classic blood mixture for Hollywood was, I want to say, corn syrup and food coloring, and Tom Sullivan added coffee to the mix. So the blood in this movie has a really dark, sinister vibe to it, and I think he also added caro syrup to make it even thicker, which I associate with pecan pie. I have a friend who makes really good pecan pie and just really goes heavy on the caro syrup. One last thing about the effects. For all of the impressive practical makeup claymation effects in this, the one effect that really gets to me, just makes me cringe and wince every time I see it, it's that first Deadite attack where she takes a pencil that they've been using to sketch and stabs the other character in the ankle with it and twists it. It's such a simple effect. It's just a pencil going into an ankle, but there's something about the texture, the rubbery texture of the ankle when the pencil bends, and maybe it's also the fact that sometimes those realistic injuries in horror movies are more disturbing because you could imagine happening to you. I think I mentioned that before on this channel. The idea that as much as I love horror movies, I'm not afraid of going to a cabin and unearthing a Necronomicon and my friends getting possessed and me having to, hold my own against them. But weirdly, I can imagine someone trying to stab me in the ankle with a pencil. I don't know what that says about me, but sometimes those mundane injuries in horror movies are even more disturbing and cringy than the supernatural type stuff. One other thing I want to talk about, we talked about how this film feels a lot more sober, stone-faced, and serious then its successors, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, and Ash vs. Evil Dead. I would say the same for Bruce Campbell's performance. I love him as Ash in this film, but I actually feel like he hasn't taken on the iconic traits of Ash quite yet. Once again, he's not really cracking wise too much. He doesn't have the chainsaw hand. He's not spouting off the one-liners. He's not ripping his shirt open. I feel like all that happens in the second Evil Dead. He almost becomes this embodiment and also a caricature of, I guess, macho-ness in the face of grave danger. And we see that transformation take place in the second film. I'm not trying to say that he's not good in this movie. I think he is, but I don't think the role required him to stretch himself beyond just playing a normal college kid. Whereas in the second film, and also, I think the second film came out, I want to say, oh gosh, it may have been 6 or 7 years later. Even though it takes place on the same night, Bruce Campbell, the actor, is much older, right? So he is kind of settled into his own body and his own personality a little bit more. And also the script calls for him to transform, especially once he's chopped his own hand off. I mean, he's physically and emotionally transforming. So we see that pivot in the second film. We see him transform into someone who isn't just going to survive, but is actively going to fight back. And I feel like that's the persona he embodies throughout the rest of the Evil Dead universe, Army of Darkness, and Ash vs. Evil Dead. Having never seen Ash vs. Evil Dead, but I've seen the marketing for it, and he very much looks like the Ash that we meet in Army of Darkness. But yeah, in this film, I think it's more just a terrified college kid who's trying to survive and is just watching in horror as all his friends get killed by this incomprehensible force. It doesn't call for the Bruce Campbell, the swagger, the if chins could kill Bruce Campbell. I feel like we would get to that, and it's interesting because this was one of the first things he did, so I don't think he had any kind of idea that he would become this genre icon. I don't even know if that happened quite with Evil Dead 2. I always feel like these movies they did really well at the box office because they were cheap to make, but they're also kind of cult classics for a while. And then I feel like in the subsequent years, as the trilogy picked up a pretty intense fandom, I feel like that's when Bruce Campbell became Bruce Campbell. By the early 2000s, he had been on The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr., and he had the cameos in Spider-Man and all of that, and I feel like that's when, even as someone who liked horror movies a lot, that was when I started to pay attention to him as this kind of satirical macho icon, if that makes sense. I might be wrong. I don't go to a lot of horror conventions. I've never met Bruce Campbell. You may be watching this and saying, no, from the beginning, he was Ash and he embodied that character, but like I said, my suspicion is that it was really the second movie that cemented that both on screen and off screen for him. So it was really interesting revisiting this film and just seeing, a Bruce Campbell in his 20s just being a kid. I don't want to say a kid, he was an adult, but you know what I mean, being a college student, because he was a college student. It was almost endearing in a way, especially once I thought of how far he stretches himself later in the series and all the acrobatics and the pain he has to go through in the next two films. And maybe we'll get to them one day. Like I said, I love this trilogy. I was actually thinking about maybe finally watching Ash vs. Evil Dead. I hear it's great. I was reminded how fun this series was, even though this movie is not the most fun of the series. It's actually, like I said, the most grueling and the most punishing, I think, just in terms of the story and the way the effects look and what we're watching. When I think of a fun Evil Dead, I really think of Evil Dead 2, and then Army of Darkness also, which is a completely different thing, and it's almost a medieval epic. The more I talk about this, I think we're going to get to these eventually. So, that is Evil Dead. I want to give a huge thank you to I Kill Your Vibe for suggesting this. Like I said, I would have done Evil Dead 2, but Evil Dead, since I like all of them, it seemed to make sense to start at the beginning, and let's be real, I was doing it for budgetary reasons too, so I didn't have to buy the second one. I feel like I used to own the second one. I feel like there are several editions of the second one. I just remember a new one coming out all the time. The DVD I remember of the first Evil Dead, I think it was the first one, it was actually meant to look like the Necronomicon, so it had this rubber cover, this rubber sleeve around the DVD cover that had the gross decaying face. It was pretty cool. So thank you, Clear Vibe, for suggesting this. We still have 2 more weeks left, right? 2, 3, who knows anymore, of viewer request month. So if there's something you would like to hear me talk about on SLAYsmr, either message me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, or let me know in the comments of YouTube. And obviously, if I have too many requests, I can't do all of them, but first come, first serve, right? If there's something you really want me to talk about and it's a horror movie, don't be suggesting any rom-coms or something like that. Just let me know and I'll make it happen. Thank you so much for watching. As I always say, tell your friends if you're into this channel, like, subscribe, all that good stuff, spread the word. I think we're maybe also going to be having a little bit of press sometime soon. We'll see. I'm trying to make some of that happen, so maybe I'll have something fun to share. Until then, I will see you next week, and be well, be safe, get some sleep, don't have nightmares, except for the good kind. I'll see you next time.